What's the most important factor for you when deciding where to live? Some might say the jobs, nature, nightlife, family friendliness, or even food. But the number one answer for most people is affordability. Now I know the holiday season always presents some great deals, but the cost of living in the following cities might actually be the best deal out there. Yes, today we're going to be talking about the cheapest cities to live in the United States. And yes, none of them are in California. Now the criteria we used for this list was based solely on living expenses. You know, everything from housing costs to utilities, groceries, health insurance, childcare, taxes, etc. And to qualify as a city for this list, a place has to have a population of at least 100,000 residents. So keep that in mind before you comment,
"Why isn't middle of nowhere town in Oklahoma population 2,000 on this list? You could buy a home there for $20K.
Oh, and if you want to see a video on the 10 best cities to live and save money in that you'd actually want to move to, let's hit 5,000 likes. But without further ado, these are the top 10 cheapest US cities to live in for 2020. Number 10. Buffalo, New York.
Wait, what? New York is like the most expensive place to live. How does city there make this list?
Well, first of all, New York is only the 5th most expensive state to live in, and that's only because most of the people here live in the New York City metro, where, yes, prices are crazy expensive. Pretty much all of upstate, however, is insanely cheap. And Buffalo is probably the cheapest of the bunch. I mean, you could literally buy a 4-bedroom house here with a mortgage payment that's cheaper than rent for a 400 square foot studio in Manhattan. But of course, New York taxes still apply, which are some of the worst in the country. The combined sales tax rate is 8.75%, income tax ranges from 6.2 to 6.85% for most residents, and the effective property tax rate is a staggering 2.64%. But when you take into account that the median home value is just $116,000, that number doesn't seem so bad. And if you're not looking to buy, the median rent is just $828 a month. Sure, wages aren't as high here as they are in New York City, but the median household income of around $60,000 isn't terrible considering the cheap cost of living and all there is to do. There's tons of fun museums, restaurants, bars, and professional sports, and Niagara Falls is just 20 minutes away. Although that also means you're only 20 minutes from Canada, so as I'm sure you can guess, it gets cold. Temperatures regularly drop well below freezing, and there's nearly 100 inches of snow here every year. Number 9. Memphis, Tennessee. The birthplace of rock and roll might be cheap, but you should probably still roll on through instead of living here. Well, unless the type of rock you're looking for is a rock breaking your car window when someone robs you. Yeah, there's a reason Memphis is so cheap. It's one of the most dangerous US cities of any size, with an overall crime rate 223% above the national average, a violent crime rate 401% above the national average, and a murder rate that's 484% above the national average. It's no wonder why no one wants to live here, even with an incredibly low median home value of just $105,000. All that crime makes sense, though, when you consider the poverty rate of 26.8% and median household income of just $54,000. And the situation isn't getting any better since the economy sucks and the public schools are even worse, which is probably due to a lack of funding since Tennessee doesn't have any state income tax. But hey, at least you're saving a few $1,000 each year. Now, if potentially being mugged, stabbed, or shot doesn't scare you, Memphis actually has a ton of cool things to do. It's a rich, multicultural city full of history, entertainment, and amazing food. Number 8. Peoria, Illinois.
Peoria, what? Wait, so you're telling me there's another city in Illinois? I thought it was just Chicago and a bunch of farmland.
Okay, dude, seriously, you're gonna have to chill out. And yeah, I guess there are no other big cities in Illinois, but with around 360,000 people living in the metro area, Peoria isn't tiny either. Situated along the Illinois River towards the center of the state, Peoria's got a cute downtown, and unlike Chicago, is incredibly inexpensive. But ironically, that well, comes with a price. While the median household income of $60,000 might seem pretty good when you consider the median home value of just $89,000 and median rent of $732 a month, the city and state of Illinois in general also have some insanely high taxes. And despite the effective property tax rate of 2.27%, the combined sales tax rate of 10%, and income tax being a flat rate of 4.95%, the city's infrastructure still sucks with tons of potholes, horrible schools, and a lack of renovation over the years that has left the city looking old and dilapidated without even an attempt to fix things. This, of course, has led to many people fleeing the city and crime emerging, with a violent crime rate 175% above the national average. But the worst part about living in Peoria is the weather. From the heavy winter and snow to tornado warnings to huge temperature swings, incredibly windy days, flooding, dreary autumns, and hot and humid summers, the climate as a whole here just isn't pleasant. Number 7. Brownsville, Texas. Yeehaw! Our first Texas city. And there definitely could be a few more considering how affordable most of the state is. Located at the very southern tip of Texas, right on the Mexican border, Brownsville is home to splendid subtropical weather and close to the beautiful beaches of South Padre Island. But while that might seem perfect for 8 to 9 months out of the year, it also means it gets way too hot and humid way too often. Not to mention the occasional hurricane. Besides the unpleasant summertime climate, however, Brownsville's great. It offers some of the best Tex-Mex in America, the art scene is thriving, and there is so much Mexican and indigenous culture. In fact, for a city of just 183,000 people, there's a surprising amount of amenities, like museums, historic sites, a zoo, restaurants, and parks. But the best part of all is how insanely cheap it is. With a median home value of just $102,000, a median rent of $787, and no state income tax, it's practically free paradise. Groceries are also 12% below the national average, and a gallon of gas is just $1.74.
Whoa, so you're telling me Brownsville is cheap and a good place to live? There has to be a catch.
Well, there is. The median household income is only $41,000, and 31% of residents still live below the poverty line despite the very low cost of living. Surprisingly, though, this hasn't led to much crime, as Brownsville is one of the safest cities in the US. I guess warm weather really does make people nicer. Number 6. Detroit, Michigan. You didn't really think we could make a cheapest cities list without talking about Detroit, did you? How is it only number 6 though, you might wonder, considering that the median home value is just $43,000 and still nobody wants to live here? Well, for starters, that number's a bit deceptive since many of the cheap homes in Detroit are abandoned and uninhabitable, while the homes people would actually want to live in are closer to $200,000 or $300,000. And while there are some cheaper areas, the violent crime rate that's 428% above the national average and murder rate that's 728% above the national average are not worth the risk. And no matter where you live, you'll be paying a lot for damage done to your car since the roads here may just be the worst in the nation. Seriously, I know someone that blew a tire within 2 miles of leaving the airport. Now, downtown has undergone huge renovations and is actually turning into a hip, fun, and safe place to be. And Detroit's metro area actually has some really nice suburbs like Bloomfield Hills or Birmingham. But there is a huge wealth gap between those affluent areas and the majority of the city, which still looks like this. Detroit's actually the most impoverished US city with a poverty rate of 36%. Number 5. Cleveland, Ohio. Similar to Detroit, Cleveland's another industrial Midwest city whose heyday is far behind it, which is a shame really, since it once was a thriving boomtown. But since the city's economy has never recovered from so many jobs being shipped overseas, more and more residents continue to leave every year. This lack of demand has made it one of the cheapest cities to live in, with a median home value of just $75,000 and a median rent of $850. $213 a month. Although, even with those low housing costs, tons of people are still struggling. The poverty rate of 34.6% is actually the second highest of any city. But at least things are probably only going to get cheaper, since I'd assume the amount of people who are dying to live in a place with a violent crime rate 281% higher than the national average is rather small. Honestly, even if you're just visiting, I'd be super careful with which neighborhoods you drive through, because you definitely don't want to break down in the wrong part of town, which is probably more likely than you'd think due to all the enormous potholes. But it's no surprise. I mean, the weather here is gloomy as heck. If you thought Portland was bad, Cleveland's saying, hold my beer, because it gets over 300 cloudy days a year, and pretty much everyone's depressed from November to March. Oh, and unlike Portland or Seattle, it actually gets really cold here with nearly 60 inches of annual snow. Number 4. Akron, Ohio.
Wait, what? Another Ohio city?
Yep, and it certainly won't be the last. Poor Ohio is home to so many cities that were once great places to live. But as jobs continue to move out, people continue to move out, resulting in an extremely affordable cost of living. Which brings us to Akron. Now, predictably, crime rates are still high, but at only 137% above the national average, it's a lot safer than Cleveland, and Cleveland's still only 45 minutes away if you want to catch a game, concert, or other big city amenity. Unfortunately, though, being so close also means the weather is still dreadful, with 300 cloudy days and 158 rainy days each year. And while the average house here is a little more expensive than in Cleveland, with a median home value of $81,000, the cost of pretty much everything else is cheaper, with the median rent being just $803, and utilities, grocery bills, childcare costs, health insurance, and even the average cost of a wedding being lower as well. Oh, and for the first time on this list, the public schools here are actually decent. Number 3. Birmingham, Alabama. Wow, what a big surprise. The largest city in our worst state to live in for 2020 just so happens to be one of the cheapest cities. Now, almost every city in Alabama is dirt cheap, but Birmingham is dirt cheap. The median home value is just $73,000, and the effective property tax rate is only 0.66%. Average utility bills are also 15% below the national average, and childcare costs are some of the cheapest in the nation at under $6,000 a year. Of course, though, there's a reason things are so cheap. Well, multiple reasons, actually. For starters, many of the super affordable houses are also falling apart. Not to mention, the neighborhoods they're in are incredibly dangerous, as Birmingham's violent crime rate is 404% above the national average, and the murder rate is 736% above the national average. But all that crime didn't come out of nowhere. The 27.2% poverty rate and huge disparity of wealth are likely to thank for that, because while the median household income of the entire metro area, including the nicer suburban areas, is $58,000, the median household income within the city limits is only 31 grand. Number 2, Dayton, Ohio. Honestly, at least like 5 or 6 different Ohio cities could have easily made this list, but that still doesn't change the fact that basically nobody wants to live in them. Now, it might seem strange that despite all of these cheap cities, Ohio didn't even make our top 10 cheapest states video, but that just goes to show the huge division of wealth the state suffers from. While cities like Columbus and the affluent suburbs are thriving, cities like Dayton aren't so lucky. Downtown is practically a ghost town. No, like even before COVID. And most of the office buildings are 80% empty. Of course, the lack of businesses also means a lack of jobs, which certainly doesn't help the poverty rate of 32%. In fact, within the Dayton city limits, the median household income is just $28,000. So while the median home cost of $68,000 and median rent of just $791 a month may seem very cheap, they obviously aren't cheap enough. Now, before we get to number 1, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and let me know what video you want to see next. Also, I wanted to give a quick honorable mention to a place that just barely missed the 100K population criteria. Flint, Michigan. Remember how Flint was in the news for all those neurotoxins and lead in the water? Well, that was 6 years ago, and the water is still toxic. And so is the entire living environment. Not only is the water causing permanent damage to the residents, so is the corrupt government, terrible school system, pothole-ridden roads, and violent crime rate 255% above the national average. Add in no good jobs and a poverty rate of 40.4%. And it's no wonder the drug problems are rampant here. Sure, you could buy a house for less than the price of your average car, with the median home costing just $31,000, but it'll probably look like this. And while the groceries, utilities, and health insurance costs are all less than the national average, don't forget to budget for a lot of bottled water. Number 1. Jackson, Mississippi. Would you look at that? The number 1 cheapest city to live in just so happens to be the capital of our number 1 cheapest state. And while Mississippi definitely isn't winning any best state awards anytime soon, it's also not the worst. And boy, oh boy, is Jackson cheap. The median home costs just $47,000, and the average utility bills, groceries, and overall cost of living are all around 10% cheaper than the national average. But is it really worth it when half of the houses on your street are abandoned or burned, and the roads have potholes the size of yoga balls? The murder rate's also 830% above the national average, and besides murder, there just doesn't seem to be much going on, unless you count obesity and teen pregnancy. Now, I honestly don't think anyone ever willingly moves to Jackson, but if you're intrigued, it is the cheapest city to live in the United States for 2020.